It's taken me a long time to be able to talk about this. For years, I just couldn't. At my wedding, my fiancé cheated on me with my best friend. His mother was there. She saw it. She didn't say a single word. My name is Rebecca Moore. I was 35 then. I was a person who believed in plans. I believed if you were loyal and you worked hard, you could build a good life, a secure life. Commitment was everything to me. I thought it was the foundation for a family, for a future. I thought it was something we all agreed on. Andrew was my fiancé. We were together for almost 10 years before he proposed. He was 38, charismatic. He was the kind of man who could walk into a room and everyone would feel at ease. He made me feel safe. I really believed our life was on the right track. I thought we were building something permanent. And Lauren was my best friend, my person. We'd known each other since we were in our early 20s. She wasn't just a friend. She was the sister I never had. I told her all my secrets, every fear about the future, every hope I had for my life with Andrew. I trusted her with all of it. She was meant to be my maid of honor. She was supposed to be the one standing beside me. Then there was Elaine, Andrew's mother. She was a very reserved woman, always quiet, always watching. I spent years trying to get her to approve of me. I just wanted her to like me, to accept me into her family. I always thought her silence was just her personality. I never imagined it could be a choice. I didn't know silence could be used like a weapon. Our wedding was supposed to be the finish line, the public celebration of a decade of love and partnership. After so long together, getting married felt like the most natural thing in the world. It felt right. We had a house. We had a shared life, a circle of friends. Everything looked so solid from the outside. But now I know I wasn't seeing everything. I was only seeing what I wanted to see. Andrew was an expert at keeping up appearances. He hated any kind of emotional conflict. If a situation became difficult, he would just avoid it. He'd let me be the one to handle the messy, emotional fallout. I used to think he was just easygoing, relaxed. I didn't understand that it was his way of avoiding all responsibility. Lauren was my biggest supporter, or at least that's the role she played. Anytime Andrew and I had a small argument or I felt insecure about something, she was the first person I would call. She would listen for hours, always telling me I was right, always taking my side. She helped me navigate my own relationship. I can't stop thinking about what she was really doing, what she was thinking during all those late-night phone calls. And Elaine, earning her approval felt like a constant uphill battle. She was never unkind to me, not directly. She was just absent, emotionally distant. She had this way of looking at me, a long, quiet stare that I could never interpret. I always felt like I was being evaluated. I spent years thinking she was just trying to decide if I was worthy of her son. It turns out she already knew about his other life. She knew who he was really choosing. The wedding planning was an intense period, so many details, so much pressure. But I was happy. I was so focused on building our perfect future together. Andrew was happy to let me take the lead. He'd tell me my ideas were wonderful, that he trusted my judgment completely. He made me feel like I was the sole architect of our big day. He was just the happy groom waiting at the end of it all. Lauren was my shadow during that time. She came with me to every appointment. We spent whole weekends together, making decisions. Our conversations were constant, all about the wedding. She seemed so genuinely excited for me, so happy that this was finally my moment. I remember one afternoon, we were addressing invitations. I started to feel so overwhelmed by it all. I told her I couldn't have managed any of it without her help. She just looked at me and smiled. It was a strange smile, I realize now. It didn't quite reach her eyes. There were small things that should have been red flags. Tiny little tears in the fabric of the story I was telling myself. Sometimes Andrew would claim he was working late, but the next day he couldn't answer a simple question about the project. I never pushed it. Why would I? I trusted him. Sometimes Lauren would cancel our plans at the last minute with a vague excuse. She was tired, she had a headache, something came up. I just assumed she was busy. We were all busy with our own lives. It never, not for a single second, occurred to me that their excuses might be related, that they might be canceling on me to be with each other. The thought was so monstrous, so impossible, that my mind couldn't even go there. It was a place that didn't exist for me. Elaine started coming around more during the planning stages. She even offered a few opinions, which was unusual for her. She watched everything with this intense, quiet focus. I mistook her observation for interest. I thought she was finally warming up to the idea of me joining the family. I remember one dinner at her house, a few months before the wedding. Andrew and I were talking excitedly about our honeymoon plans. I glanced over at Elaine. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at Andrew. The expression on her face wasn't one of happiness or pride. It was something else. It was, I don't know, a resignation maybe. A deep sadness. I brushed it off. I told myself I was just being insecure, reading too much into her quiet ways. I wanted everything to be perfect so desperately that I just manufactured perfection in my own mind. The week of the wedding was pure chaos. People were flying in. There were a million last-minute things to do. Andrew was a sea of calm in the middle of it all. The perfect, charming groom. He kept telling me to relax, that everything was handled. He promised me the day would be perfect. Lauren was glued to my side. She was the best friend everyone dreams of, the maid of honor who thinks of everything. She kept me from panicking. She ran errands. She was my anchor. The night before the wedding, we had a sleepover, just like when we were kids. She stayed in my hotel room with me. We talked for hours about the next day, about my life, my future, the one I was about to step into. I started to cry a little bit. I was just so full of emotion. Happiness, nervousness, everything at once. She took my hand. She told me I deserved every bit of the happiness that was coming my way, and I believed her. I looked at my best friend, and I believed every single word she said. The morning of the wedding felt unreal. There was so much activity, so many people around me. I felt this incredible sense of peace. After all the planning and the stress, the day was finally here. I was so sure of everything. I was sure of Andrew. I was sure of our future. I was sure of the life we were choosing together. Lauren was there, helping me. She was calm and efficient. She seemed completely normal. She helped me with the final touches. She made sure I had everything I needed. There was a moment just before I was about to leave my room when it was just the two of us. I hugged her. I told her how much I loved her, how much her friendship meant to me. She hugged me back tightly. She told me she loved me too. I look back at that moment and I feel nothing. It's like watching a movie about two strangers. Elaine was there too in the background. She came to the room where I was getting ready. She didn't say much. She just stood by the door, watching. She told me I looked nice. It was a simple statement, delivered in her usual flat tone. I remember feeling a little disappointed. I was hoping for something more, a hug, a warm smile, something, but I told myself that was just Elaine. This was her way of showing she cared, by being present, by observing. I had no idea what she was really observing. I had no idea she was already watching a tragedy unfold. The ceremony itself is a blur to me now. I remember fragments. I remember walking. I remember seeing Andrew waiting for me. He was smiling. It was the smile I had known for 10 years, the one that always made me feel like everything was going to be okay. I stood there, across from him. We went through the motions. We made our promises. I believed every word I said, and I believed every word he said. There was no doubt in my mind, not a shadow of one. I felt like the luckiest person in the world. I felt like my life was finally complete. The moment it was over, people were happy. There was so much noise and celebration. I felt Andrew's hand in mine. It felt solid, real. We walked back down the aisle together. I remember looking at the faces of our friends and family. Everyone was smiling. It was exactly what I had dreamed of. A public declaration of our life together, surrounded by everyone we loved. I felt so certain, so incredibly foolishly certain. The transition to the reception was a whirlwind. People were congratulating us, hugging us. I was on a cloud. I was just so happy. Andrew was by my side. He was charming. He was gracious. He was playing the part of the happy husband perfectly. I didn't notice anything was wrong at first. Why would I? We did all the things you're supposed to do. We had our first dance. We cut the cake. Everything was following the plan. Everything was perfect. Lauren was always nearby. She gave a speech. She talked about our long friendship. She told funny stories from our college days. She talked about meeting Andrew for the first time and how she knew he was the one for me. She said she had never seen me so happy. She wished us a lifetime of love. Her words were beautiful. Everyone was moved. I cried. I looked at her, my best friend, speaking so eloquently about her love for me and my new husband. It felt like such a pure, perfect moment. I have replayed that speech in my head 1,000 times. I've dissected every word, every pause. I was looking for a sign, a hint of the truth. But there was nothing. She was a flawless performer. Even Elaine seemed to be enjoying herself. She was talking to guests, she was smiling occasionally. I remember catching her eye from across the room. I smiled at her, and she gave me a small, tight nod. At the time, I interpreted it as a sign of approval, a final acknowledgement. I felt a sense of relief. I had finally been accepted. The first hint that something was off was small. So small I almost missed it. It was about 2 hours into the reception. The party was in full swing. I was talking to my aunt when I realized I hadn't seen Andrew for a little while. Maybe 15 or 20 minutes. I wasn't worried. I just figured he was mingling with guests on the other side of the room. Or maybe he'd stepped outside for some air. I excused myself and started to look for him. I walked through the main area. I saw his father, his cousins, but not him. I asked his brother if he'd seen him. He said he thought Andrew had gone to the bar. I went to the bar. He wasn't there. A little knot of unease started to form in my stomach. It was just a flicker of a feeling. I told myself I was being silly. He was a grown man. He was probably in the restroom. Then I realized I hadn't seen Lauren for a while either. That was a little more strange. As the maid of honor, she had been sticking pretty close to me all day. I scanned the room for her. She wasn't anywhere in sight. My brain still didn't connect the two things. It just registered two separate facts. Andrew was missing. Lauren was missing. I decided to check the little side room that was set up for the wedding party, a private space to store our things and take a break. I thought maybe he was in there, taking a phone call or just catching his breath. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, and that's when my life, the one I had so carefully built, came to an end. They were in there together, my new husband, and my best friend. There was no ambiguity. There was no way to misinterpret what I was seeing. My brain just stopped working. I couldn't process it. It was like watching something that wasn't real. I didn't make a sound. I couldn't. The air was gone from my lungs. They didn't see me at first. They were completely lost in their own world, a world that I was not a part of. And then I saw her. Over Andrew's shoulder, through the gap in the doorway, I saw Elaine. She was standing about 20 feet away down the hall. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking directly into that room. She was watching her son with my best friend. She was perfectly still. Her hands were clasped in front of her. Her face had no expression, none at all. It was a blank mask. She wasn't shocked. She wasn't surprised. She wasn't angry. She was just watching. In that single silent moment, I understood everything. She knew. She had known. This wasn't new to her. She saw me standing there. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. She didn't react. She didn't look away in shame. She didn't rush over to me. She just held my gaze, and then she turned, very slowly, and walked away. Her silence was confirmation. It was the final, brutal piece of the puzzle. The betrayal wasn't just Andrew's. It wasn't just Lauren's. It was hers, too. The noise from the reception hall sounded like it was coming from a million miles away. I was frozen in that hallway. My whole body felt cold. I finally understood her quietness. It wasn't shyness. It wasn't reservation. It was complicity. She had watched me plan this day. She had watched me spend our money. She had watched me pour my heart and soul into a future that she knew was a lie. She let me walk down that aisle. She let me say those vows. She knew what her son was. She knew what he was doing. And she protected him. She protected the image of her family. She chose her son's secret over my dignity, over my heart. That was the real betrayal, the one that cut deeper than the affair itself. The act was about lust and selfishness. The silence was about cruelty. It was a conscious choice to let me be humiliated. In that moment, something inside me broke. The part of me that cared about appearances, the part that cared about what other people thought, the part of me that wanted to be a good wife, a good daughter-in-law, it all just evaporated. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I felt nothing at all. It was a strange, hollow feeling, a complete and total detachment from the situation. I turned around. I walked away from that door. I walked back toward the noise and the lights of the party. I saw the smiling faces. I saw the dancing. I saw the elaborate fantasy I had built for myself. And I just kept walking. I walked past my parents. I walked past our friends. I didn't say a word to anyone. I walked straight out the main entrance and into the night. I left my wedding. I left my husband, I left my best friend, and I left a woman who stood by and watched it all burn. I never went back. The weeks that followed were a fog. My parents handled everything. They were the ones who had to face the guests. They were the ones who had to announce that the wedding was over. I couldn't talk to anyone. I stayed at my parents' house, in my childhood bedroom. My phone was a constant barrage of calls and texts from Andrew, from Lauren. I didn't answer. I couldn't. What was there to say? Andrew left long, rambling voicemails. He was sorry. It was a mistake, a moment of madness. He didn't know why it happened. He never once mentioned that his mother had been there, that she had seen it. Lauren sent endless texts. She was begging for my forgiveness. She said she would do anything to fix it. She said she loved me and that she had made the worst mistake of her life. Her words meant nothing. They were just noise. I never heard from Elaine. Not a call, not a text, not a card, just silence. The same silence she gave me in that hallway. It took me a long time to piece together the truth. The full truth. It didn't come from them. It came from other people in small fragments. A friend of a friend who had seen them together at a bar months before the wedding. A cousin of Andrew's who admitted that the family always thought he and Lauren had a special connection. The timeline started to form in my mind. This wasn't a moment of madness at our wedding. This had been going on for a long time. They had been lying to me for months, maybe even years. Every time I had called Lauren, crying about a small issue with Andrew, she had been sleeping with him. Every time Andrew had told me he loved me, he was thinking of her. They had built a whole separate life behind my back, a life that I had funded with my trust and my blindness. The final piece of the puzzle came from Andrew's aunt. She called me about 6 months after the wedding. She was a kind woman, and I think she felt guilty. She told me that Elaine had known. She had known for at least a year. Andrew had confessed to his mother a long time ago. He had told her he was in love with Lauren, but didn't know how to leave me without causing a huge disruption. Elaine's advice to him was to go through with the wedding. She believed it would be less embarrassing for the family to deal with a divorce later than to cancel a wedding at the last minute. She was worried about the deposits we would lose. She was worried about what people would say. Her primary concern was not my heart or my life or the vows her son was about to make. Her concern was logistics and appearances. She watched me plan my wedding, knowing her son was in love with my best friend. She let me walk toward my own destruction just to avoid a social inconvenience. Hearing that, it changed everything. It wasn't just passive silence anymore. It was an active, calculated decision. She had been a willing participant in the deception. She was an architect of my humiliation. That knowledge freed me. It freed me from any lingering sense of responsibility or guilt. It freed me from wondering if I had missed the signs or if I could have done something differently. This was never about me. It was about their selfishness, their cowardice, and her cold, pragmatic cruelty. I finally understood that the problem wasn't that I wasn't good enough. The problem was that I was in a room full of people who didn't value me at all. I filed for an annulment. The marriage had never been real. I cut off all contact. I blocked their numbers. I deleted their existence from my life. It was a long and painful process. I had to rebuild my entire life from scratch. I had to learn who to trust again. I had to learn that some people are not who they appear to be. I had to accept that my best friend and the men I loved were strangers, and that the woman whose approval I craved was my enemy. I live a different life now, a quieter one. I am more cautious. I don't give my trust away so easily. I have learned that betrayal hurts. I walked, I didn't run. Running would have felt like panic, like I was the one who had done something wrong. Each step was deliberate, a conscious act of placing one foot in front of the other, away from the music, away from the laughter, away from the life I had spent a decade building. The gravel of the parking lot crunched under the ridiculous satin heels I had insisted were the perfect final touch. Perfect. The word was a bitter joke in my mind. The cool night air was a shock against my flushed skin, a welcome slap of reality. Behind me, through the grand oak doors of the venue, the party continued. Our song, and my song, I corrected myself, was probably about to play for the first dance. I pictured the guests turning, looking for the happy couple, a slow ripple of confusion spreading through the room. The thought gave me a grim, hollow satisfaction. Let them be confused. Confusion was a luxury I no longer had. I had clarity, a horrible crystal clear clarity. I reached my car, the one Andrew always called the sensible sedan, and fumbled in the tiny beaded purse Lauren had given me that morning. Something new, she'd said, her eyes shining with what I had mistaken for love. Inside, my keys were nestled next to my phone. I got in, the voluminous layers of my wedding dress bunching around me like a cage of tulle and lace. It was absurd. I was a bride in a getaway car, fleeing the scene of my own life. I drove, I didn't know where I was going, just away. The manicured lawns of the countryside estate gave way to the familiar streetlights of the suburbs, then the brighter, harsher glow of the city. I drove on autopilot, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. My mind wasn't processing the road. It was a projector stuck on a single, repeating loop. The image wasn't of Andrew and Lauren. That was a wound, yes, a raw and primal betrayal that felt like a physical blow. I could almost understand it in a sick textbook way. A moment of weakness, drunken stupidity, a long simmering attraction. It was ugly and devastating, but it was a story as old as time. No, the image that played over and over, searing itself into the back of my eyelids, was of Elaine. Her face had no expression, none at all. It was a blank mask of polite indifference, the same mask she wore at grocery stores or when speaking to a waiter. She stood in the hallway, her posture perfect in her tailored mother-of-the-groom dress, and she watched her son press my best friend against a wall. She saw my reflection in the glass of a framed painting. She saw my face crumble, and she did nothing. She held my gaze for a fraction of a second, and in that moment, the silence was so absolute, so profound, it swallowed the entire world. Then she turned, her steps neat and measured, and walked back toward the reception hall. She saw it. She didn't say a single word. She knew. That silence. It's the part I can't explain to people. It was so much louder than the betrayal itself. Andrew's actions were a betrayal of our love. Lauren's were a betrayal of our friendship. But Elaine's silence was a betrayal of basic human decency. It was a calculated act of non-intervention. It was complicity. I look back now and understand that her silence wasn't passive. It was a choice, a weapon. I found myself pulling into the parking garage of a sterile downtown hotel. I needed anonymity. I couldn't go to my parents' house, not yet. I couldn't bear their pity, their anger on my behalf. I needed a space with no memories, no expectations, a quiet, empty room. The clerk at the front desk, a young man with tired eyes, didn't even blink at the sight of a woman in a full wedding gown checking in alone at 10 p.m. on a Saturday. He just swiped my credit card with a practiced weariness. "Just one night?" he asked. "I don't know," I heard myself say, my voice a dry rasp. The hotel room was beige and impersonal. Perfect. I locked the door, leaned against it, and finally let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The sound was ragged, almost a sob, but there were no tears. My body felt cold, frozen from the inside out. I walked to the full-length mirror on the closet door and stared. The woman in the reflection was a stranger. Her hair was perfectly coiled, her makeup immaculate, her dress a fairy tale. She was the image of everything I thought I wanted. A wife, a partner, the architect of a beautiful life. But her eyes were hollow, haunted. She was a ghost in a costume. Slowly, mechanically, I began to undress. I couldn't reach the long row of tiny pearl buttons that ran down my back. A task Lauren was supposed to help me with at the end of the night. In the honeymoon suite, that was likely still filled with rose petals. The irony was so sharp, it almost made me laugh. I twisted and struggled, my frustration mounting until I finally grabbed the delicate lace of the bodice and just ripped it. The sound of tearing fabric was shockingly loud in the quiet room. It was a relief. I tore at it again, freeing myself. The dress pooled at my feet, a sad white puddle on the unremarkable carpet. I kicked it aside. I never wanted to see it again. I stood there in my slip, shivering, and finally pulled out my phone. 37 missed calls, 16 from Andrew, 10 from Lauren, the rest from my mom, my dad, my brother, and a flood of text messages from Andrew. "Becca, where are you? People are asking questions." From Andrew. "Come back. We can talk about this. It's not what it looked like." From Andrew. "Rebecca, please, you're embarrassing me." Embarrassing him. The selfishness of it was breathtaking. It was so purely Andrew, always worried about appearances, about the path of least resistance. He wasn't sorry he did it. He was sorry he got caught. He was sorry it was inconvenient. From Lauren. Oh my God, Beck, I heard you left. Are you okay? I'm so worried. From Lauren. Whatever you think you saw, it was a misunderstanding. Andrew was upset about the speech and I was just calming him down. Please call me. The performance. Even now she was performing. The perfect concerned friend. The hypocrisy was so profound it made me feel dizzy. I was just calming him down. The words were an insult to my intelligence, to the decade of friendship she had just incinerated. I scrolled through the rest of the messages, my thumb moving numbly over the screen. My mom's were frantic with worry. My dad's were short, demanding to know if I was safe. I would have to face them eventually, but not yet. Not until the ice in my veins thawed enough for me to feel something, anything, other than this vast, echoing emptiness. Then I looked for a name. Elaine. There was nothing. No missed calls, no texts, not a single word. Of course there wasn't. Her message had already been delivered, back in that hallway. It was a message of absolute chilling indifference. My public humiliation was a manageable cost. The disruption of her son's carefully curated life was not. Her silence wasn't an absence of communication. It was the communication itself. It said, you are disposable. The plan is more important than you are. My son's comfort is more important than your heart. It's taken me a long time to understand the pragmatism of that kind of cruelty. At that moment, in that beige hotel room, I just felt the coldness of it. It was colder than Andrew's betrayal, colder than Lauren's deceit. Theirs was a fire that burned me. Hers was a vacuum that stole the air from my lungs. I stared at the phone, at the blinking notifications of a life that was no longer mine. With a final, decisive movement, I pressed the power button and held it down. The screen went black. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't hers, it was mine. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay on top of the stiff hotel comforter and stared at the ceiling. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just lay there and replayed the silent movie of Elaine's face, learning the first brutal lesson of my new life. Some people don't need words to destroy you. Sometimes all they need is to watch. The annulment was a quiet affair, a legal erasure. It's a strange thing, an annulment. It doesn't just end a marriage. It declares that one never truly existed in the first place. My lawyer, a woman with kind eyes and a brutally efficient demeanor, explained it in the terms of fraud. A contract entered into under false pretenses is not a valid contract. My marriage, all 6 hours of it, had been the ultimate false pretense. I sat in her beige and impersonal office, the city humming 13 floors below, and signed the papers. My signature, which had been so full of hope and flourish in the wedding registry just weeks before, was now tight and sharp. A single, decisive stroke. An ending. They are not contesting it, my lawyer said, stacking the documents into a neat pile. In fact, Mr. Peterson's counsel was eager to expedite. Of course he was. A contested annulment would have meant depositions. It would have meant a public record of his deceit, of Lauren's duplicity, of Elaine's complicity. A quiet erasure was a gift to them. It allowed them to slip back into the shadows and pretend it never happened. For a moment, a hot, vindictive anger flared in my chest. I wanted to fight. I wanted to drag their names through the mud they had so gleefully created for me. But then I looked at my own hands, resting on the polished mahogany of the table. They were steady. The fight would have kept me tied to them. It would have meant more months of my life poisoned by their names, their faces. An annulment was cleaner. It was a declaration not just that the marriage was a fraud, but that their entire place in my life had been fraudulent. It was the only truth that mattered. Good, I said, my voice even. Let them have their silence. That silence was the soundtrack to my next few months. After leaving the hotel that night, I had gone to the only place I could think of, a sterile, anonymous hotel near the airport. I turned off my phone. For 3 days, I ordered room service and stared at the ceiling, my white dress hanging in the closet like a ghost. The fog of shock was so thick I could barely think. I felt nothing, and yet I felt everything at once. It was a hollow, ringing emptiness. When I finally turned my phone back on, it was a digital assault. Hundreds of missed calls, a tidal wave of texts, from my parents frantic with worry, from bridesmaids confused and concerned, and from him, Andrew. Rebecca, where are you? Please just talk to me. This is all a huge misunderstanding. We can fix this. I love you, don't throw 10 years away. And one from Lauren, just one. I'm so sorry. Please call me. I deleted them all, every single one. Then I blocked their numbers, I blocked their emails, I blocked them, their families, and our mutual friends on every social media platform. I performed a digital amputation. It was swift and brutal and necessary. I never went back to the house we had bought together, the one I had so lovingly decorated. I sent my father with a moving crew. He was a man of few words, but his quiet, steady fury on my behalf was a shield. He packed up my life, my clothes, my books, the paintings I'd done in college, the chip mug I loved, and moved it all into a storage unit. He told me later that the house was pristine, almost sterile. Andrew had cleared out every trace of me before my father even got there. Another erasure. I live on the top floor of a walk-up now, in a neighborhood on the other side of the city. My apartment is small, with old wooden floors that creak and a window that looks out onto a brick wall. It is the first place that has ever been entirely mine. The architecture of my new life was built on a foundation of solitude. Some days, the quiet was a comfort. Other days, it was a crushing weight. In those moments, I would be tempted. The urge to know what happened to them would rise up like bile. Were they together? Did they flaunt it? Did they get the happy ending they had built on the wreckage of my own? I never looked. I knew with a certainty that had become my new compass that looking would be like drinking poison and expecting them to die. My healing depended on my ignorance. The world, however, has a cruel sense of humor. About 8 months after the wedding that wasn't, a thick cream-colored envelope arrived in my mailbox. It had no return address, but I recognized the elegant, slanted handwriting instantly. It was Elaine's. My whole body went cold. It was the same cold I had felt in that hallway, the chill of her silent judgment freezing my blood. For a full day, the letter sat on my small kitchen counter. I circled it like a predator. Part of me wanted to burn it, to toss it away unread. But the part of me that had survived, the part that was now piecing together the truth, needed to know. I had survived the truth once. I could survive it again. I finally slit it open with a kitchen knife. The paper was heavy, expensive, of course it was. Inside was a single sheet, filled with that same impeccable script. Rebecca, it began. No dear. Just my name, a summons. I am writing to you not to ask for forgiveness, as I suspect that is a currency you are no longer dealing in. I am writing to provide context, which I believe you are owed. My breath hitched. Context. Not an apology, not remorse. An explanation, as if this were a business deal gone wrong. Andrew and Lauren are together now. They are making a life. It has been difficult, as you can imagine. The social fallout was significant. Many of our friends did not understand. But they are happy, truly happy, in a way I never saw Andrew with you. The words were like tiny sharp cuts, each one precise, designed to inflict maximum pain. She wasn't just telling me they were together. She was validating their relationship at the expense of mine. She was telling me I had been the placeholder. I have known for over a year that Andrew's heart was with Lauren. He came to me in tears, torn apart by his love for her and his loyalty to you. He is not a bad man, Rebecca. He is simply a man who avoids conflict, and he was terrified of hurting you. He loved you in his way, but it was the love of comfort, of history. With Lauren, it is the love of a lifetime. My advice to him to proceed with the wedding was pragmatic. I will not apologize for it. A decade of shared life, families, and finances is not something to be dismantled lightly. The damage of a cancellation, the shame, the financial loss would have been catastrophic for everyone. I believed, perhaps wrongly, that once you were married, he would settle into his commitment, that his feelings for Lauren would fade into a youthful infatuation. It was a calculated risk. It did not pay off. I saw your face in the hallway that night. I know what you must think of me. But my silence was not malicious. It was resignation. In that moment, I saw the inevitable unfolding. There was nothing to be said that could have changed the outcome. My first loyalty is and always will be to my son. I was protecting him. I hope, in time, you can find a way to move forward without bitterness. They deserve a chance at happiness, and you deserve peace. Sincerely, Elaine Peterson. I read it once, then I read it again, sincerely. The word was so absurd, so grotesquely out of place, that a laugh escaped my lips. It was a harsh, ugly sound in the quiet of my apartment. She had given me no apology. She had given me a manifesto, a masterclass in narrative control, written by the architect of my humiliation. She wasn't explaining her actions. She was justifying them, casting herself as the pragmatic, protective mother and me as the collateral damage in a great love story. They deserve a chance at happiness. The audacity of it burned hotter than any anger I had felt before. She didn't regret what she did. She only regretted that it had become messy, that her calculated risk had failed. My public humiliation wasn't the tragedy. The social fallout for them was. I stood up, walked to my stove, and turned on a gas burner. A blue flame hissed to life. I held the letter by its corner, the thick, creamy paper that felt like an insult. I watched as the flame licked at the edge, turning Elaine's elegant script to black ash. It curled and withered, her justifications, her pragmatic cruelty, her son's great love story turning into smoke. I dropped the last flaming piece into the metal sink and watched it burn out. She thought she was giving me context. She thought she was writing the final chapter of my story with them. But what she had actually given me was a gift. The last stubborn vestiges of self-doubt, the tiny, insidious voice that sometimes whispered, "What if you had been more? What if you had been different?" It all burned away with that letter. It was never about me. I could have been the most beautiful, witty, and perfect woman on earth, and it wouldn't have mattered. I was simply an obstacle in the path of what they wanted. My purpose in their story was to be the thing that was overcome. I washed the ashes down the drain, the water rinsing the last of them from my life. I looked out my window at the brick wall, and for the first time it didn't feel like a barrier. It felt like a boundary, solid, secure, something they could never touch. The peace she had wished for me, in her own twisted way, was finally beginning to arrive. Not because of her words, but in spite of them. The last curl of smoke from Elaine's letter vanished into the cold February night. I stood on the tiny balcony of my new apartment, watching the orange ember in the ceramic pot fade to black, leaving behind a fragile gray ash. The air was sharp, and for the first time in 8 months, the cold felt clean instead of just cold. It wasn't the explosive, victorious moment you see in movies. There was no swell of triumphant music, no tears of cathartic release. There was only the quiet hum of the city below and the solid, grounding weight of my own breathing. Peace. It had finally arrived, not as a guest, but as a permanent resident of the space inside my own ribs. I had spent months feeling like a house gutted by fire, haunted by the ghosts of what I thought I had. That letter, in all its calculated cruelty, had been the final act of demolition. It bulldozed the last precarious wall of self-doubt I hadn't even realized was still standing. It wasn't my fault. It was never my fault. I never wrote back. I never called. Their story, the grand sweeping love of a lifetime, could continue without me as a character, without me as an audience. I had my own story to write now, and its first chapter was about building. My new life was small, deliberately so. After the sprawling 4-bedroom house Andrew and I had bought, a house I had meticulously decorated as a stage for a future that was never mine, I craved the opposite. I found a 1-bedroom apartment in a part of the city I barely knew, an old brick building with cranky radiators and original hardwood floors that groaned with character. It was mine. The lease had only my name on it. The mismatched furniture was chosen by me, for me. There was a comfortable chair for reading, a sturdy wooden table for working, and shelves filled with books I wanted to read, not books that looked good as decor. It was a space designed for living, not for performing. I had also changed my work. My previous job in marketing had felt inextricably linked to the life I'd lost, a world of appearances, of selling a narrative. I couldn't do it anymore. On a whim, I took a course in architectural restoration. It was methodical, demanding work. It was about history, about structure, about integrity. I learned to see the bones of a building, to understand how things were put together and why they sometimes fell apart. My first project was assisting on the restoration of a century-old library. My days were spent carefully scraping away layers of paint, discovering the original intricate stenciling beneath, peeling back layers of rot to find the solid heartwood. The metaphor was not lost on me. I was building a life with my own two hands. A quiet life, a secure life. For months it worked. The silence that had once been a weapon used against me became my sanctuary. I'd walk through the city with music in my ears, invisible. I'd spend Saturdays at the library, lost in research. My world shrank until it contained only things I had personally vetted, people I had chosen. There was my boss, a kind elderly man named Arthur, who spoke more to buildings than to people. There was my neighbor, a woman in her 70s who grew herbs on her windowsill and sometimes left a small pot of rosemary outside my door. It was enough. I thought, with the naivete I was slowly learning to shed, that I could maintain this quarantine forever. I believed I had successfully amputated the past, but the past is not a limb. It's a phantom, and it reappears when you least expect it. It happened on a Tuesday in late autumn, more than a year after the wedding. The library project required a specific type of brass polish for some original fixtures, and Arthur had sent me to a specialty hardware store across town. The kind of old-fashioned place with towering aisles of dusty, unlabeled boxes. It smelled of sawdust and metal and turpentine. It was a place of creation, of fixing what was broken. I was in the back, running my fingers along a row of varnish tins, when a voice cut through the quiet hum of the store. No, Andrew said the satin finish, not the semi-gloss. He was very specific. The voice was familiar, polished, controlled. I froze. My hand hovered over a can of shellac, my knuckles suddenly white. I didn't need to look. I knew that voice like I knew the scar on my own knee. It was Lauren. My first instinct was primal. Flight. Hide behind the towering shelf of plumbing supplies, slip out the back entrance, and run until the smell of sawdust was gone. The old Rebecca would have done that. She would have done anything to avoid a confrontation, to prevent a scene. Her heart would be hammering, her palms sweating. But my heart wasn't hammering. It was beating a slow, steady rhythm. My palms weren't sweating. They were dry. I felt a strange, cold curiosity. I stayed perfectly still, listening. "He's making such a fuss about the nursery," Lauren continued, her voice laced with a sound I recognized as fond exasperation. It was the same tone she used to use when talking about Andrew with me. "You'd think he was the one who had to spend all day in there. Are you sure this color is right? It looks a little yellow." Then the other voice, the one that had echoed in my nightmares for months, saying nothing at all. "It's called Sunbeam, dear. It will be lovely. It will dry much lighter. Trust me." Elaine. My whole body felt like it had been plunged into ice water. It wasn't a shock of pain, but of absolute chilling clarity. They were together, shopping for paint, for a nursery. The architect of my humiliation and her prize-winning accomplice, debating shades of yellow for the baby that would have been my nephew or niece, but would now be something else. The child of my ex-husband and my ex-best friend. I didn't move. I just listened to the metallic scrape of the shopping cart wheels on the concrete floor. They were getting closer. I knew I should move, but my feet felt bolted to the ground. This was a moment I had dreaded, and in some dark corner of my mind, prepared for. What would I do? What would I say? Would I scream? Would I cry? Would I hurl a can of paint thinner at their heads? The cart rounded the corner of the aisle. I saw them first. Elaine was pushing the cart. A selection of paint swatches fanned out in her hand. She looked exactly the same. Her silver hair was perfectly coiffed. Her posture was ramrod straight. She wore a tailored camel coat that probably cost more than my first car. Lauren was beside her, her hand resting on her swollen belly. She wasn't showing much, but it was unmistakable. She looked tired but happy, the way pregnant women are supposed to look, the picture of domestic bliss. Lauren saw me second. Her eyes widened and the color drained from her face. Her hand flew from her belly to her mouth, a gesture of pure, theatrical shock. The can of polish I was holding slipped from my grasp and hit the floor with a loud metallic clang that echoed through the cavernous store. The sound made Elaine look up from her paint swatches. Her gaze followed Lauren's, and then they landed on me. Our eyes met across an aisle of wood stains and solvents. For a split second, the world fell away. It was the hallway at the wedding all over again. The noise of the party, the silent complicity, the final devastating glance. But this time was different. I wasn't in a white dress, shattered and uncomprehending. I was in my work clothes, covered in a fine layer of plaster dust. I was not a bride. I was a survivor. I saw it in her eyes, not remorse, not shame. just a flicker of pure, unadulterated panic. The smooth blank mask she wore had cracked. She was the one who had been caught. Her carefully constructed narrative, her protected son, her perfect new reality. I was the ghost at her feast, the one person who knew the full, unvarnished truth. Lauren looked like she was about to be sick. She took a half step back, bumping into a display of sandpaper. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. I had learned from the master. Silence could be a statement. Silence could be a judgment. I held Elaine's gaze for a long, steady moment. I let her see that I wasn't broken. I let her see that I wasn't afraid. I let her see that she had absolutely no power over me anymore. Then I did something I hadn't planned. I gave her the smallest, slightest nod. It was an acknowledgement. I see you. And then I bent down, picked up the can of polish, and placed it back on the shelf. I turned my back on them, my movements calm and deliberate. And I walked away. I walked past the rows of nails and screws. I walked past the power tools and the garden hoses. I walked to the front of the store, paid for my items in cash, and stepped out into the crisp autumn air. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew what I would see. Two women standing frozen in an aisle, their perfect afternoon shattered, their can of sunbeam yellow suddenly looking garish and cheap. I walked all the way back to the library, the 2 miles feeling like nothing. The cold air filled my lungs. I was not ruined. I was not a tragedy. I was a woman who knew how to fix things. And I was finally completely free. The automatic doors of the hardware store hissed shut behind me, cutting off the sterile, fluorescent world inside from the gray afternoon. I stood on the concrete for a moment, my canvas tote bag digging into my shoulder, the keys to my truck cold in my palm. The air smelled of damp pavement and exhaust fumes, a gritty reality that was a welcome shock to my system. I didn't run. I walked. A calm, measured pace across the sprawling parking lot to my beat-up Ford Ranger. My hands were shaking. Not with fear or even rage, but with a strange vibrating energy, like a bell that had just been struck. I fumbled the key into the ignition, the engine turning over with a familiar, comforting rumble. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, and stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back was pale, her eyes wide, but she wasn't shattered. She wasn't the ghost in the white dress. For the first time in over a year, I had been in the same room as Elaine Peterson, and I had been the one to walk away. I saw her face in my mind's eye, a flash of a memory already searing itself into my brain. In that hardware store aisle, under the harsh, unforgiving lights, she hadn't looked like the untouchable matriarch from my memories. She looked small. The carefully constructed mask of detached composure had cracked, revealing the panic underneath. Her skin seemed thinner, the lines around her mouth deeper. She looked old and Lauren. The swell of her stomach beneath her coat was a fact, a physical manifestation of the life they had built on the wreckage of mine. A year ago, that sight would have hollowed me out, left me gasping for air on the side of the road. But today, seeing it in person, I felt a profound and chilling distance. It was like looking at a scene from a movie I had once seen, a story about someone else. The pain was an echo, not a fresh wound. The primary emotion was a flat, sterile confirmation of a truth I had already accepted. This was their reality. It was no longer mine. The drive to my current job site was 20 minutes of near silence, broken only by the hum of the tires on the wet road. My mind, however, was anything but silent. It was replaying the encounter, not with the frantic, looping horror of my wedding day, but with the slow, analytical eye of a film editor. The key was the silence. At my wedding, her silence had been a weapon of immense power. It was an active, suffocating thing. It was an endorsement. I see this. I approve of this. You are nothing. It had been the final, killing blow, so much more devastating than Andrew's betrayal. It was the moment that told me my decade of love and loyalty had meant absolutely nothing. It was a public execution of my worth. But today, in that aisle of spackle and wood glue, the silence was mine. I had taken the weapon she had perfected and turned it back on her. I had looked at her, really looked at her, and I had said nothing. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't demand the apology I knew I would never receive. I simply saw her, acknowledged her presence, and then dismissed her with my departure. I had communicated everything without a single word. You have no power over me anymore. Your judgment is irrelevant. Your world does not touch mine. Silence for silence. A debt repaid in its own currency. I pulled up to the curb in front of the Henderson house, a grand but faded Victorian I'd been working on for the past 3 months. The owner, a widower in his 80s named Mr. Henderson, was restoring it not to sell, but to live in. He said he wanted to see it breathe again. It was a slow, painstaking project, and I loved every minute of it. Restoring things was my new language. Taking what was broken, what was rotted and neglected, and patiently, methodically, making it strong again. The scent of sawdust and old wood greeted me as I walked up the porch steps. I was supposed to finish sanding the newel post at the base of the grand staircase today. I dropped my bag and ran my hand over the intricate carved oak. Someone 100 years ago had spent weeks on this. It had survived fires, neglect, and changing tastes. It had good bones. Tough day at the supply store, Rebecca? I turned. Mr. Henderson was standing in the doorway of the parlor, holding 2 mugs of tea. His face was a kind map of wrinkles, his eyes a gentle, faded blue. You could say that, I said, managing a small smile. He handed me a mug. It was warm in my cold hands. You have that look, he said, nodding sagely. The look my wife used to get when she ran into one of her sisters at the market. Like you've just seen a ghost and are trying to decide if you believe in them or not. I let out a short, surprised laugh. That's a very specific look. It's a very specific feeling, he countered, his gaze knowing. He gestured toward the staircase. Beautiful, isn't it? When I bought this place, the previous owners had it covered in 3 layers of lead paint and a truly hideous shag carpet runner. They said it was easier than dealing with the scratches and the gouges. He took a slow sip of his tea. Some people will do anything to avoid looking at the damage. His words landed with the force of a physical blow. I steadied myself against the post, the smooth sanded wood a solid presence under my palm. Some people will do anything to avoid looking at the damage. Andrew, with his easygoing charm, that was really just profound emotional cowardice. Elaine, with her pragmatic cruelty dressed up as maternal protection. They hadn't wanted to deal with the scratches and gouges of a canceled wedding, of a failed relationship, so they had just painted over me. What did you do? I asked, my voice quiet. What do you mean? With the staircase. How did you fix it? Ah, he smiled. Well, you know how. You're the one doing it. You strip away all the junk, layer by layer. It's tedious. You get down to the bare wood, see the full extent of the rot and the damage. You have to be honest about it, then you sand it down. You brace what's weak. You fill in the holes. You don't try to hide the history of the thing, but you make it whole again. You make it strong enough to stand on its own for another 100 years. I looked from his honest, kind face to the staircase I was slowly bringing back to life. My throat felt thick, and the parts that are too rotten to save. Oh, those you have to cut out, he said simply. No question. You can't build on a rotten foundation. It'll compromise the whole structure. We stood there for a long moment, the shared warmth of the mugs, the scent of Earl Grey and pine-scented cleaner filling the air. He didn't press. He didn't ask what ghost I had seen. He just offered the simple, profound wisdom of a man who knew how to fix things. Later that evening, after I'd finished my work and driven back to my small apartment, my phone buzzed on the counter. I had changed all my contact information over a year ago, but there are always ways. A mutual acquaintance, a shared professional network, a determined mother-in-law who never liked to lose. I looked at the screen, a number I didn't recognize, a text message. Rebecca, it's Andrew. I heard you saw Lauren and my mom today. I know things are complicated, but I was hoping maybe we could talk. For real this time. I read the words once, twice, the same old Andrew, the gentle phrasing, the attempt to frame himself as the reasonable one seeking closure. I heard you saw them. Not. They told me they ambushed you. Not. I'm sorry for the pain they caused. It was all about him, his need to smooth things over to manage the narrative, his desire to avoid the damage. A year ago, this message would have sent me into a tailspin. I would have agonized over it, drafted 100 angry, wounded replies, and maybe even been foolish enough to answer, hoping for an apology that would never come. I looked at his name on my screen. I thought of Elaine's face in the hardware store, twisted with shock and the loss of control. I thought of Lauren, a stranger with a familiar face, living a life built on a lie. I thought of Mr. Henderson's words. You have to cut it out. You can't build on a rotten foundation. My fingers moved with a calm that felt like it was born in my bones. I didn't type a reply. I didn't give him the satisfaction of an answer, of engagement, of knowing he had gotten under my skin. I simply held down my finger on his message, selected block this caller, and confirmed. Then I deleted the thread. The notification vanished. It was just gone. I stood in my quiet apartment, the one I paid for with money I earned, restoring what others had discarded. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't the perfect life I had once meticulously planned. But it was solid. The foundation was sound. It was mine. The old Rebecca was a house that had been condemned, a structure compromised by rot. But you don't have to live in the ruins. Sometimes you just have to tear it down and start again, on cleared ground. I am the architect now, and I am building for one. I blocked the number. The screen of my phone glowed for a moment. The name Andrew, now just a ghost in the recent calls list, slated for digital oblivion. I pressed the power button, plunging the screen into darkness. There was no surge of adrenaline, no triumphant swell of vindication. There was only a quiet, mechanical finality. A door clicking shut. I sat in my car for a long time, the engine off, the parking lot of the hardware store slowly emptying around me. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windshield, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. For a moment, I was back in that hallway, the muffled sound of my own wedding reception on one side and the sharp, ugly truth on the other. That day, their silence had been a physical force, a wall of glass pressing in on me, suffocating me. Today, my silence had been a shield. I had held it up, watched it reflect their panic, and walked away unscathed. The drive home was a blur of traffic lights and familiar streets that suddenly felt alien. My mind kept replaying this scene not as a trauma, but as a piece of data to be analyzed. Lauren's belly, round and prominent under her sweater, a life growing from a lie. I felt a strange detachment, the way one might feel when reading a headline about a distant tragedy. It was a fact, and it had very little to do with me anymore. I had mourned the loss of my best friend over a year ago. The woman in the store was just a stranger with a familiar face. It was Elaine's expression that held my focus, that flicker of pure, undiluted panic. In her letter, she had spoken of a calculated risk. She had gambled with my life, my heart, and my dignity, and she had lost nothing. She had insulated her son, managed the social fallout, and preserved her precious family image. Her composure at the wedding, her cold gaze as I shattered. It was all part of the performance of control. But in that aisle, surrounded by paint chips and spackle, her control had fractured. She wasn't the architect of my humiliation then. She was just a woman standing next to her son's pregnant mistress, terrified that the past she had so carefully buried was about to detonate in the middle of a Tuesday. She hadn't been afraid for me. She had been afraid of me. Silence could be used like a weapon. I had learned that lesson from the master herself, and I had learned that the most powerful response is sometimes no response at all. When I got back to my apartment, the quiet wrapped around me like a familiar blanket. It was a 2-bedroom unit in a converted brick warehouse downtown, with high ceilings and original hardwood floors that I was painstakingly restoring myself. The air smelled of sawdust and lemon oil, the scent of my own labor. On the kitchen counter sat the items from my trip: a can of dark walnut stain, a set of antique brass hinges, and fine grit sandpaper. Tangible things for a tangible project. My life was full of them now. I ran my hand over the rough, unfinished surface of an old oak bookshelf I was saving from ruin. This was my work, taking something that had been discarded, something whose history was etched in scratches and water rings, and finding the beauty still hidden within. Peeling back the layers of neglect to reveal the strong grain underneath. It's a slow, methodical process. It requires patience. It requires seeing what something can be, not just what it has been. As I put the stain away, my mind drifted back to Andrew's text. We need to talk. 2 years ago, those words would have sent a jolt of anxiety through me. Andrew hated talking. He avoided confrontation with a practiced ease that I, in my naivete, had mistaken for an easygoing nature. He outsourced difficult conversations. He let problems fester until they either vanished or exploded, at which point he would look around with an expression of wounded innocence, as if he were merely a bystander to his own life. So why now? Why, After more than a year of absolute silence, did he suddenly need to talk? The timing was no coincidence. Elaine must have called him the second my car left the parking lot. I could picture the conversation perfectly, her voice tight with renewed control. I saw her. She knows about the baby. She looked... How did she describe how I looked? Calm, uncaring. That would be the most terrifying thing to them. My indifference. Their drama, their secrets, their truly happy life. It was a storm happening on a distant shore. I was no longer in the boat. The old me, the Rebecca who planned a wedding down to the last hand-lettered place card, would have agonized over that text. She would have seen it as a potential opening for closure, for the apology I never received. She would have crafted a dozen different responses in her head, weighing each word, desperate for an explanation that would finally make the senseless cruelty make sense. I look back at that girl and I feel a profound sense of pity for her. She believed closure was something another person could give you, a gift to be requested and if you were lucky, granted. I know now that closure isn't a conversation. It isn't an apology. It's a decision. It's the moment you realize that their reason don't matter. It's the quiet understanding that the lock on the door was on your side all along and you are the only one with the key. Andrew didn't want to talk. He wanted something from me. Absolution, perhaps. Or maybe just the quiet satisfaction of knowing he could still get a reaction, that he still occupied space in my head. He wanted to see if the wound was still open. Blocking his number was my way of telling him it had long since scarred over. My phone rang, and for a wild second, my heart seized, thinking it was him from a different number, that my peace was already being tested. But the name on the screen was unfamiliar, a number with a local area code. I hesitated, then answered. "Is this Rebecca Moore?" a man's voice asked, professional and warm. "It is," I said, my own voice steadier than I felt. "This is Arthur Vance, from the City Preservation Board. I'm calling about your bid for the Old Northwood Library restoration." My breath caught in my throat. The Northwood Library. It was the project I'd been dreaming of since I started my business. A cavernous, century-old building left to decay for 20 years. A masterpiece of stone and wood that everyone else had written off as a lost cause. I had spent weeks on my proposal, poring over original blueprints, detailing how I would save the coffered ceilings and repair the intricate marquetry floors. I wanted the job so badly it ached. "Yes," I managed to say. "The board was exceptionally impressed with your proposal, Ms. Moore. Your respect for the building's integrity, your eye for detail. It was a unanimous decision. The project is yours, if you still want it." I sank onto a stool at my kitchen island, my knuckles white where I gripped the edge of the counter. The words echoed in the quiet of my apartment. Unanimous decision. The project is yours. It wasn't a consolation prize. It wasn't a lucky break. It was something I had earned. It was proof, solid and real, of the life I had built from the rubble of the old one. A life based on my skill, my vision, my strength. "Yes," I said, and this time my voice was clear, ringing with a certainty that was all my own. "Yes, I want it, thank you." After we hung up, I walked over to my drafting table, where a copy of the library blueprints was still unrolled. I smoothed my hand over the crisp paper, tracing the lines of the grand reading room, the sweeping staircase, the forgotten corners thick with dust and history. It was a massive undertaking, a beautiful, complicated, worthy challenge. The image of Elaine's panicked face, of Lauren's swollen stomach, of Andrew's pathetic, belated text. They were already fading. They were notes in the margin of a history book, footnotes to a story that was no longer mine. They were the past. Before me was the future. It was a vast, empty space, waiting to be restored, waiting to be filled. My hands were steady. I was ready to begin. The contract was signed. The ink was dry. It felt more real, more binding than the marriage license I'd signed less than 2 years ago. That had been a document of hope and assumption. This was a document of skill and promise. My promise to myself and to the city. I stood in the grand, echoing silence of the Northwood City Library's main reading room. It was the kind of silence that felt holy, a stark contrast to the other silence that had defined my life, the one that had been used like a weapon in a carpeted hallway. This silence wasn't an absence of sound, it was a presence. It was the collected weight of 100 years of stories, of quiet study, of thoughts taking flight. It was a silence that held history, not judgment. Dust motes danced like tiny ballerinas in the shafts of late afternoon sun, slanting through the arched, grime-caked windows. The air smelled of decay and potential, the sweet, musty perfume of old paper and the sharp, earthy scent of damp plaster. It was a beautiful ruin. My beautiful ruin. I ran my hand over the checkout desk, its mahogany surface scarred with a century of use. Gouges from book cards, a constellation of ink stains, the smooth, dark patina, where generations of librarians had rested their elbows. Andrew would have seen only the flaws. He would have said, just tear it out. Get something new. He was never a man who understood that history and value were written in the imperfections. I see that now. I see that he was a guest in the life I was so carefully building. A handsome, charming guest who enjoyed the decor and took credit for the architecture, but who'd never once picked up a hammer. My first week was spent in discovery. That was the official term on my project timeline. Phase 1, discovery and assessment. It was my favorite part of any job, the peeling back of layers. I wasn't just looking at a building, I was conducting an autopsy and a genealogy all at once. I walked every inch of the 30,000 square feet, my steel-toed boots echoing on the marble floors. I carried a clipboard, a headlamp, and a sense of profound, almost reverent purpose. In the children's wing, I found faded wallpaper, a repeating pattern of storybook animals hidden beneath 3 layers of beige paint. A pragmatic choice, I'm sure, to cover up the whimsy. Easier to paint over it than to preserve it. It was a familiar logic. I took a small utility knife and carefully cut a square of the wallpaper, peeling it back. The little painted fox in his waistcoat was still there, his smile intact. I put the fragile square in a protective sleeve. A piece of the original story. Saved. The foundation was solid. That was the first thing I checked even before the bid was finalized. You can fix almost anything. Cracked plaster, leaking roofs, broken windows. But if the foundation is compromised, you're just decorating a collapse. Ours had been. Andrew and I. The life I thought we had was built on sand. And I was the only one who didn't know it. I was too busy hanging pictures to notice the cracks forming under my feet. Find anything interesting, Ms. Moore? I turned. An older man stood in the doorway, his frame thin and slightly stooped, but his eyes sharp and curious behind thick glasses. This was Mr. Harrison, the head of the city's historical society and the library's most passionate advocate. I'm finding the library's memory, Mr. Harrison, I said, holding up the protected square of wallpaper. It was a forest in here once. He shuffled closer, his soft-soled shoes making no sound. He peered at the fox. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. Albie, I remember that. My mother used to say the animals were watching over us while we read. His gaze drifted around the cavernous, empty room. It's a good building. It's got strong bones. The strongest, I agreed. We stood there for a moment, 2 strangers united in our affection for this place. You know, he said, his voice quiet, they almost tore it down in the 70s after the flood. The basement was a complete loss. They said it was cheaper to demolish it and build a concrete box somewhere else. What stopped them? I asked. People, the community. They formed a bucket brigade right down these steps. They passed books hand to hand, drying them on the lawn. They held bake sales. They protested. They refused to let it go. He looked at me, his expression serious. They knew it was worth saving. A lump formed in my throat. I swallowed, focusing on the professional mask I was learning to wear, the one that didn't betray the tremor of emotion. That's what we're doing again. Just with a bigger budget than bake sales. He chuckled, a dry, papery sound. Indeed. Well, the city chose the right architect for the job. You have a restorer's eye. His words settled in my chest, warm and heavy. A restorer's eye. It was the highest compliment I could imagine. It meant I could see past the damage to the inherent worth beneath. It was a skill I'd had to learn to apply to myself. The past didn't just live in the library. It had a way of finding me too. A few weeks into the project, a bundle of forwarded mail arrived at my small apartment. It was mostly junk, catalogs and credit card offers addressed to my old life. But one package was different. A small square box, wrapped in familiar silver paper. A wedding gift return. Addressee unknown. No forwarding address. I stared at the box on my kitchen counter. It was from a distant cousin of my mother's. Inside, I knew, with 2 crystal champagne flutes. I remembered opening the card on the wedding day, the gift table piled high with the architecture of a future that would never be built. I stood there, my hand hovering over the box. A year ago, I would have cried. 6 months ago, I would have thrown it against the wall, craving the cathartic shatter of glass. Now, I felt a quiet weariness, a distant echo of pain, like the phantom limb of an amputated life. It wasn't sharp, it was just there, a fact, an artifact from a different dig site. I picked up the box, walked to the trash can, and dropped it in. I didn't open it. I didn't need to see the proof. I didn't need to smash it to feel powerful. I just needed to throw it away. It belonged to a person who no longer existed, sent to an address she no longer occupied. My work was my sanctuary. The library became my world. I lost track of time within its dusty walls. My days were filled with the scent of sawdust and the satisfying heft of my blueprints. I learned the building's secrets. A hidden dumbwaiter, a patch of floor worn smooth by the pacing feet of a long-dead librarian, the way the afternoon light hit the west-facing windows and turned the whole room gold. One evening, I stayed late, long after my small crew had gone home. The temporary work lights cast long, distorted shadows. I was alone in the main reading room, my blueprints spread across a massive oak table. The plans were covered in my own annotations, my handwriting a decisive, confident script. Reinforce north wall joist, restore original plasterwork, refinish all original oak. I looked from my plans to the room around me. I could see it. Not the ruin, but the resurrection. I could see the soaring ceilings, the polished wood, the shelves filled with books. I could hear the quiet rustle of pages turning, the soft footsteps of children headed for the storybook forest. I was not erasing the damage. The flood, the neglect, the layers of paint, they were part of the library's story, just as the betrayal was a part of mine. But they would no longer be the defining chapter. The restoration was the next chapter. The story of how it was saved, of how it was made whole again, not by erasing its past, but by honoring its foundation and building upon it. The silence of the great room wrapped around me, a comforting embrace. This was my work, my life, a structure I was building with my own 2 hands on a foundation I had tested myself. It was solid, and it was mine alone. The Atherton Mill project became my world. It was a cathedral of industry, its spine broken by decades of neglect, its vast windows clouded with the dust of forgotten labor. To most people, it was a ruin, a carcass of brick and iron waiting for the finality of the wrecking ball. To me, it was a promise. It was a structure that had been betrayed by time and economics, but its bones were good, solid, honest. I saw not what it was, but what it could be. My days fell into a rhythm dictated by blueprints and structural reports, the scent of sawdust and damp earth. I walked the cavernous floors, my footsteps echoing in the silence, and felt a kinship with the building. I was tracing its fractures, diagnosing its weaknesses, and plotting its revival. The work was demanding, physical, and blessedly tangible. You cannot lie to a load-bearing wall. You cannot charm a crumbling foundation. The truth is revealed in stress tests and measurements, in the uncompromising laws of physics. It was the antithesis of the life I had left behind. I was on site one afternoon, late in the fall, when the air was crisp and smelled of rain. The demolition crew had finished clearing out the rotted debris from the main turbine hall, and for the first time you could see the full, breathtaking scale of the space. Light streamed in from the high, clear-story windows, illuminating dancing dust motes like tiny constellations. I was standing in the center of it all, a hard hat on my head and a roll of plans under my arm, when I saw a figure standing in the massive arched doorway. For a moment, I didn't recognize him. He was thinner, and the easy, confident posture I knew so well was gone, replaced by a hesitant slump. He wore a suit that seemed too big for him, as if he'd borrowed it from a more successful man. It was Andrew. My whole body went cold, a familiar, sickening plunge. But this time, it was different. It wasn't the freefall of shock. It was the deliberate, controlled descent of an elevator. I felt the reaction, noted it, and then set it aside. I did not move. I just watched him as he took a few tentative steps into the hall, his expensive leather shoes scuffing on the concrete floor. He looked around, his gaze sweeping over the exposed brick and steel beams. a bewildered expression on his face. He looked lost. "Rebecca?" he called out, his voice swallowed by the immense space. I stayed where I was, forcing him to cross the distance between us. It was a small thing, a minor shift in power, but it felt monumental. He was no longer the center of the room. He was an intruder in my world. As he got closer, I could see the changes more clearly. There were new lines around his eyes, and his skin had a pallid, stressed quality. The effortless charm had curdled into something desperate. "What are you doing here, Andrew?" My voice was steady. It didn't even tremble. He stopped a few feet away from me, wringing his hands. It was a gesture I had never seen him make before. Andrew had never been one for overt displays of anxiety. I had to see you," he stammered. "I tried calling." "I know." He flinched, as if my simple confirmation were a slap. "Rebecca, I made a terrible mistake." I looked at him, at this man who had shared my bed for 10 years, who had stood before our friends and family and promised me forever, while his real promise was hidden away in a side room. The words "a mistake" felt so small, so insulting. A mistake is taking the wrong turn on the highway. A mistake is buying milk that's about to expire. What he did was not a mistake. It was a series of 1,000 calculated choices, culminating in an act of breathtaking cruelty. "That's what you came here to tell me?" I asked, my tone flat. "No, yes, I don't know," he said, running a hand through his hair. He looked around the cavernous hall again, as if searching for an escape route. "This is what you do now, fix old buildings?" "I restore them," I corrected him, a surprising edge of pride in my voice. "I find things of value that have been neglected, and I make them strong again." The metaphor hung in the air between us, so heavy and obvious that he couldn't possibly miss it. He looked down at his shoes. "It's not working," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The project is perfectly on schedule," I said, deliberately misunderstanding him. "No, me, with Lauren." He looked up at me, and for the first time I saw the full extent of his misery. It wasn't regret. It wasn't remorse for what he'd done to me. It was self-pity, pure and absolute. "It's all broken, Becca. The baby. He cries all the time. Lauren isn't. She's not you. She's not happy. Nothing is ever good enough." I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no pity, no flicker of my old affection. It was like listening to a weather report from a distant country. The architect of my humiliation was complaining about the shoddy materials he had chosen for his own life. "And my mother," he continued, his voice cracking, "she's not the same." At the mention of Elaine, a switch flipped inside me. This was the part of the story I hadn't seen, the chapter that was written after I walked away. I remained silent, a technique I had learned from the master herself. Silence, I had learned, was a language all its own. It creates a vacuum, and the people rush to fill it. "After we saw you," he said, "at the hardware store, she fell apart. We got in the car, and she was just quiet. A different kind of quiet than usual, not her calm, controlled quiet. This was brittle. We got home, and she went to her room. Lauren tried to talk to her, to smooth it over, but she wouldn't answer." He paused, taking a ragged breath. I watched him, my face a mask. I was the blank wall he was throwing his words against. "Later that night," he said, "I heard a crash. I ran to her room. She had swept everything off her dresser, all the little porcelain figures she collected, the silver-framed photos, all of it shattered on the floor. She was just standing there, staring at her own reflection in the mirror, and she said, 'He'll never respect you.' She saw to that. She was talking about me and you." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. He was offering me the story of his mother's breakdown as a kind of peace offering, a shared confidence. He still didn't understand. He thought her pain might be a balm for mine. "She broke, Becca," he whispered. "The perfect, unshakable Elaine Peterson. You broke her with a single look. She hardly leaves the house now. She looks at Lauren's baby, her own grandson, like he's a stranger, like he's the evidence of a crime. The silence in that house, it's so loud, it's suffocating." There it was, the final piece. Elaine's silence had not been a shield, it had been a cage. And when I had refused to be imprisoned with her, when I'd walked away from her silent judgment and built a new life, the cage had collapsed inward. Her complicity, her pragmatic cruelty had consumed her. She hadn't just watched me be humiliated. She had authored a future for her son that was built on a lie, and the lie had rotted the foundation of her own life. I looked at Andrew, standing there in the dust and debris of my beautiful broken mill. He was waiting for a reaction, for absolution, for anger, for a fight, for anything that would make him the center of the story again. I gave him nothing. "There are some structures that are too compromised," I said, my voice clear and calm in the vast, quiet hall. "The rot is too deep. You can't salvage them. You just have to tear them down and build something new on a clean foundation." I held his gaze. "There's nothing left to restore here, Andrew." I turned my back on him. I didn't look back to see his reaction. I just walked away, my hard hat secure on my head, my blueprints held tight under my arm. The sound of my boots on the concrete floor was steady and sure, the sound of a woman walking toward her own future. I left him standing in the ruins of a life I had long since abandoned. I had a building to save. I turned my back on him then. I didn't look over my shoulder to see if he was still standing there, a ghost haunting the edge of my new life. I just walked. The crunch of gravel under my work boots was the only sound that mattered. It was a real sound. Solid. Each step took me further away from the ruin he inhabited and deeper into the world I was building. My foreman, a man named Sal, with hands as worn as old leather, caught my eye as I stepped back onto the site. He didn't ask, he just nodded, a silent acknowledgement that whatever had pulled me away was now over. I picked up a piece of reclaimed timber, its surface grooved with the marks of 100 years of a history. I ran my hand over the wood. It was dense and heavy. It had survived. It was here. I was here. The dust motes dancing in the afternoon light seemed to settle. He was gone. I knew it without looking. The air had changed, the oppressive weight of his weakness and his regret lifting like a morning fog. I spent the rest of the day working, losing myself in the methodical process of measurement and craft. I was restoring a collapsed archway, fitting new keystones into the old brick. It was a job that required precision, patience, and an understanding of how things bear weight. It was a language I understood. This brick supports that one. This beam distributes the load. Remove one critical piece and the whole thing comes crashing down. That night, I sat in the quiet of my own apartment. It wasn't large or extravagant, but every single thing in it was mine. I had chosen the paint, a soft, calming gray. I had bought this sturdy second-hand armchair. I had hung the architectural prints on the walls. It was a space that asked nothing of me and offered everything in return. Safety, solitude, peace, a silence of my own choosing. And in that peaceful silence, I finally let myself think about Elaine. Andrew's words came back to me, not with the frantic desperation he had delivered them with, but as cold, hard facts. She doesn't speak. She just sits there. The silence is suffocating. I closed my eyes. I pictured her. The woman who had stood in that hallway, her face a blank mask of pragmatic cruelty. The woman who had judged my pain and found it an acceptable price for avoiding social inconvenience. The woman who had used silence as a weapon, as a shield, as a final, damning verdict. She was silent now. It wasn't the same, though. I knew that with a certainty that settled deep in my bones. Her silence at my wedding had been an act of power. It was a choice. It was the deliberate withholding of comfort, of decency, of basic human compassion. It was a silence that was loud, active, and violent. It had screamed, "You are not one of us. Your humiliation is meaningless. The family will be preserved." But this new silence, the one Andrew described, that wasn't a weapon. It was a cage. I thought of her in that big, perfect house, the one she had worked so hard to maintain, as a monument to their family's flawless image. I had been inside it so many times, had admired the polished surfaces and the carefully curated art. I had mistaken its pristine order for warmth. Now I imagined the silence filling up those rooms, creeping into the corners, smothering the air. A silence born not of control, but of its absolute loss. I felt a strange, cold clarity. It wasn't pity. I would never feel pity for her. And it wasn't joy either. There was no triumph in the thought of her suffering. It was something else. It was the dispassionate observation of a fundamental law like gravity or decay. It was the final, logical step in an equation she herself had written. Elaine, the architect of my humiliation, had become the sole occupant of her own ruined cathedral. She had built her prison, brick by silent brick, and then locked the door from the inside. The thing she had wielded with such precision had turned back on her. The silence she had used to erase me had in the end erased her instead. In the hardware store, she hadn't just seen me. She had seen her own failure. She had seen a woman who was supposed to be broken, shattered, and swept away. But I wasn't. I was standing there, covered in the dust of my own making, buying tools to build a life she had no part in. I was solid. I was real. My quiet confidence was a mirror, reflecting her own hollowness, and the image had cracked her from the inside out. Her carefully constructed world, built on a foundation of appearances, couldn't bear the weight of that one simple truth. I never went back to that worksite after the project was finished, but I drive by it sometimes. The old textile mill stands proud now, its brickwork clean and strong, its windows gleaming. It's been converted into artist lofts filled with light and life and purpose. It was saved. It was given a new story. I live a different life now. It's been years since I saw Andrew. I heard through a stray piece of gossip that he and Lauren finally sold a house, Elaine's house. They moved to a smaller place in a different town, chasing a happiness that I suspect will always be one step ahead of them. They are bound together not by love, but by the shared ugly secret of their beginning, a foundation of sand. My own life is quiet. It is a good quiet. The quiet of reading a book on a Sunday afternoon. The quiet of walking through the woods, listening to the rustle of leaves. The quiet of being perfectly, contentedly alone in a life that is full. It is a silence that heals, not one that harms. Sometimes when I am drafting plans for a new restoration, I think of her, Elaine, the ghost in the silent house. I don't think of her with anger anymore. I don't feel anything at all, really. She is just a cautionary tale, a lesson in the architecture of ruin, a reminder that some structures are so rotten at their core that they are destined to collapse under their own weight. I look back at that moment, turning away from Andrew for the last time, and I understand it now. That was the moment the restoration was complete. Not the buildings, but mine. He had come to me for closure, for some kind of absolution that I could not and would not give him. But in doing so, he gave me a gift. He gave me the final chapter of their story. And knowing it, truly understanding the grim, poetic justice of it all, was what finally allowed me to lay down the weight I didn't even know I was still carrying. I walked away from him, from them, from the girl in the white dress with the shattered heart. I walked back to the solid ground I had laid for myself, stone by stone. And I never looked back. I walked. I didn't look back, not even when I heard the faint, defeated scrape of his chair against the pavement. The sound was swallowed by the city, a single, insignificant noise in a world that had long since moved on. The air was cool on my cheeks, and I drew it deep into my lungs, a clean and clarifying breath. The conversation was over. The story was over. He looked smaller than I remembered. That was the thought that kept circling in my mind as I navigated the familiar blocks back to my apartment. The confident, easygoing man I had planned a life with had been an illusion, a carefully constructed performance. The man who sat before me today was what was left after the costume had been stripped away, hollowed out, exhausted, and desperately seeking an absolution I did not have to give. His confession was not for me. It was for him. A last, selfish attempt to lighten his own load by placing a piece of it at my feet. But the weight didn't settle on me. It dissolved before it could even touch the ground. I unlocked the door to my apartment, the solid click of the deadbolt echoing in the quiet hall. My home. It smelled of turpentine, old wood, and brewing coffee, the scent of my life now. There were no pristine white surfaces here, no carefully curated art chosen to project an image of sophisticated success. Blueprints were spread across my dining table, a stack of books on architectural history teetered on a chair, and a fine layer of dust from my latest project coated the windowsill. It was a space that was lived in. It was real. I made my way to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, my hands steady. I thought of Andrew's words, replaying them not with pain, but with the detached curiosity of an analyst examining data. It's all broken, Rebecca. The house, us, my mother. My mother. His words about Elaine were the final, crumbling stone in the edifice of their lies. She, the architect of my public humiliation, the silent queen on her throne of appearances, was now a prisoner in the very kingdom she had fought to protect. He described her sitting in that perfect living room, the one I had helped decorate, surrounded by loveless quiet. Silence, once a weapon she had wielded with such surgical cruelty, had become a cage. The irony was so stark, so complete, it was almost poetic. I felt no satisfaction. I felt no pity. What I felt was a profound and chilling sense of correctness. The way an engineer feels when a faulty structure collapses exactly as the calculations predicted. Her silence at my wedding hadn't been a lack of action. It had been a deliberate choice, a pragmatic move to preserve the family's facade. She had gambled that my pain would be quieter than a public scandal. She had gambled that I would break, and break quietly. She lost. And in losing, the silence she had used to suffocate me had turned inward, consuming her instead. She was a ghost in her own perfect house, a fitting end. The next morning, I was on site by 7. My current project was a 19th century brownstone in a historic district, a grand old lady that had been carved up into cheap apartments in the 70s and left to decay. My firm had been hired to restore it to its original single-family glory. I loved this part of the process. The demolition was done, the bones of the house exposed. Standing in the cavernous front parlor, I could see the building's history laid bare. Patches of original horsehair plaster clung to the lath. Faint water stains mapped old leaks, and the glorious wide plank heart pine floors were scarred with the ghosts of 100 different walls. It was a mess. It was beautiful. My job was to see past the damage to the integrity beneath, to understand the structure, not just the surface. I spent the morning with a crowbar and a hammer, carefully prying away a section of cheap drywall that was hiding an original fireplace. It was slow, meticulous work. You couldn't just smash your way through. You had to feel for the seams, to understand where the modern, cheap additions met the solid, historic structure. With each piece of flimsy board I pulled away, more of the truth was revealed. First, a corner of the marble mantelpiece, choked with dust and debris. Then the elegant curve of its arch. Finally, the entire hearth, its stone stained with a century of soot but miraculously intact. My partner, David, came in, holding 2 cups of coffee. He was a kind, quiet man with an encyclopedic knowledge of load-bearing walls. He looked at the newly uncovered fireplace and whistled softly. "Look at that," he said, handing me a cup. "Good bones. I told you she had good bones." I smiled, wiping a smudge of plaster dust from my forehead with the back of my glove. She always did. Just had to get through the ugly renovations. We stood there for a moment, sipping our coffee in comfortable silence. This was a different kind of silence than the one I had known with Elaine. Hers was a void, a withholding. This was a shared quiet, one of respect and mutual understanding. It was the silence of 2 people looking at the same thing and seeing the same potential, the same solid truth beneath the mess. Andrew had said his life with Lauren was broken. Of course it was. It was a life built on a foundation of lies. They had tried to build a future on rotten ground, and now they were shocked that the floors were giving way. They had mistaken the thrill of deceit for the substance of love. They had thought a wedding, a house, and a baby were structural components, when they are merely decorations. Without a foundation of honesty and respect, they are just props on a collapsing stage. I looked at the fireplace. We would have to clean it, repoint the brick, and polish the marble. We would have to strip the floors, sand them, and seal them to bring out the deep, rich color of the old-growth pine. We would have to reinforce the joists in the ceiling and rebuild the crumbling window frames. It was a long, arduous process. It required patience, strength, and an unwavering belief in the value of what lay underneath. It's the work I had done on my own life. I spent the rest of the day working, the rhythmic scrape of my tools a kind of meditation. I stripped away the layers of peeling paint from the massive pocket doors, revealing the intricate grain of the oak beneath. Each motion was deliberate, purposeful. I was not erasing the past, I was revealing the truth of it. The house's scars, the nicks, the gouges, the stains were part of its story. I wasn't trying to make it look brand new, I was trying to make it whole again. By the time I left, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows through the empty window frames. I stood on the sidewalk and looked up at the brownstone's facade. It was still a wreck to the casual observer, a ruin of brick and boarded-up windows, but I didn't see a ruin. I saw a promise, I saw strength, I saw a future being built from a past that had been honored, not erased. I no longer believe in perfection. Perfection is a facade, a thin veneer hiding the inevitable cracks. I believe in integrity. I believe in solid foundations. I believe in the beauty of things that have been broken and lovingly, painstakingly put back together. Things that are stronger for having been tested. Andrew, Lauren, Elaine, they are ghosts now, haunting a life I no longer live. Their story is one of rot and decay, of a beautiful house that was hollowed out from the inside. My story is different. It is the story of this brownstone. It is a story of restoration. I don't build on facades, I build on foundations. And I am not silent.